My name is Vivian, 35 years old, and for more than a decade, I had been almost erased from my own family. On the day of my grandmother Evelyn's funeral, the only person who had ever protected me, I stood outside the cemetery with no one in the family inviting me in. They believed she had died penniless, leaving nothing behind. But a few hours later, a phone call from a lawyer turned everything upside down. She had left me a secret asset, and I had only 72 hours to claim it. Something that was not only money, but also the key to uncovering the truth about the disappearance of the entire family fortune. Have you ever been treated like an outsider by your own family, only to suddenly hold a secret that could shift the balance of power? Share your thoughts in the comments, hit like and subscribe to the channel so I can tell you the whole story, the story they wish had never been exposed. I was born into a family that never truly felt whole. My mother, Lorraine, was a strong woman who worked every job from office secretary to supermarket cashier to raise me. My father left when I was too young to remember his face, and my mother never mentioned him again. The happiest years of my life were when my mother and I moved in with my grandmother Evelyn. Her house wasn't big, but it was filled with the smell of baked goods and the sound of jazz drifting from the old kitchen radio. She taught me how to garden, how to save every penny, and always said, "You have to know how to keep a place for yourself even when no one gives you one." But everything changed quickly when my mother got sick. Cancer came like a storm, sweeping away both our hopes. I was in college, working part-time at a coffee shop to help pay for her medicine. Even so, the illness won. On the day my mother died, I stood at the back row of the funeral, clutching her old shawl, feeling like the world had cast me out. After the funeral, I thought I would keep living with Grandma Evelyn as before. But just 2 weeks later, my Uncle Frank and his wife, Melinda, showed up at her door with polite smiles and eyes already set on the outcome. "Vivian," Melinda said, sweet but cold, "Grandma needs peace and quiet. You're an adult now, you should take care of yourself. This isn't the right place for you anymore." I looked at my grandmother, hoping she would object, but she lowered her head, her clouded eyes avoiding mine. I didn't know if she was silent out of weakness or pressure. Frank handed me a small envelope. Inside was $200 and a sheet listing a few cheap motels. "You're smart," my uncle said. "Think of this as a fresh start." Fresh start sounded like a blessing, but to me then it felt like a sentence. I left with my old suitcase, a few clothes, and my textbooks, walking away from the house that had once been my safest place. I rented a damp one-room apartment on the outskirts of town. The walls were stained, freezing in winter, suffocating in summer. I had to work 2 part-time jobs, mornings at the college library, evenings at a fast food restaurant, to pay rent and tuition. While I pinched every coin, my family still appeared dazzling on social media and at gatherings I was rarely invited to. Photos of long tables laden with lobster, glasses of golden wine, and trips to Europe. They flaunted expensive gifts, talked about new houses and new cars, and if I ran into them by chance, they looked at me like a stranger. Once I ran into Melinda at the supermarket. She wore a fur coat, pushing a cart filled with organic groceries and imported wine. When I smiled and greeted her, she glanced over and said, "Still working at the same place? Keep it up." Then she turned away. Clutching a pack of discounted noodles, I felt both small and out of place. Even during the holidays when the whole family gathered, I was only a guest standing on the sidelines. The one time I was invited to Christmas dinner at Frank's house, I sat at the kids' table while all the important conversations happened at the main one. I overheard them discussing real estate investments and profit sharing, but no one asked how I was doing. I once believed that if I worked hard and succeeded, they would change how they saw me. I threw myself into studying, graduated on time, and landed a stable job at the city library. But no matter the degrees or the better paycheck, I was never considered one of them. Many nights, lying in my small room with the heater humming, I wondered what had made me the unwanted one in my own family. Was it because my mother had been a single mom? Or because I was never part of the inner circle that guarded each other's interests? Only Grandma Evelyn sometimes kept in touch, calling to check in. Her voice grew weaker over the years, her conversations short, often ending with a half sentence. "There are things I want to tell you, but it's not time yet." I didn't understand what she meant, only that her words warmed me a little in those cold months. I had gotten used to fending for myself, but deep down there was still an emptiness, not from lack of money but from the absence of belonging. And that emptiness is why I never could have expected what was coming. When the call from the lawyer came, opening a door back to the past I thought was buried. I still remember clearly the day everything began to make sense, and the day I realized I had been cut out of my own family's story long ago. I was 26, working an afternoon shift at the library. While shelving returned books, I happened to find an old local newspaper, the top corner showing Grandma Evelyn's familiar gentle smile as she shook hands with a man in a suit. The headline read, "Evelyn Campbell sells lakeside property to development company, multi-million-dollar deal." I froze. She had once owned a large lakeside property? I had never heard anyone in the family mention it. In my memory, she only had the small house and the tomato garden behind the kitchen. I took the paper home, spread it out on my kitchen table, and read every word carefully. The article said she had sold more than 30 acres to a company building a luxury resort. The contract was worth a substantial sum, no exact figure given, but from market value at the time, I knew it had to be several $1,000,000. The next day I called Uncle Frank. "Oh, Vivian. What's going on?" His voice was deep but not exactly warm. I asked directly, "Uncle, I found an article saying Grandma sold the lakeside land. What's that about?" There was a short pause before he answered, "Oh, that was a long time ago. He got scammed by an investment group. They promised to double her money but then went bankrupt. Lost everything." "Did she ever get any money from the sale?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "Just a small part. Then she gave it to them to invest again. You know her, too trusting." I hung up with a growing sense of unease. The explanation was too neat, like a story rehearsed in advance. Grandma Evelyn wasn't someone easily fooled. She had spent her life saving, counting every penny, and checking all her paperwork carefully. I started digging. On late nights at the library after everyone had gone, I went through public property records. The lakeside land had indeed been in Evelyn's name, but the transfer deed to the company had one strange detail. Her signature was unusually shaky, and the witness listed was Melinda, Uncle Frank's wife. I also found another document. 6 months after the sale, that development company sold the land to a smaller company whose registered address matched Melinda's real estate office. I sat frozen, eyes locked on the computer screen. The scam story Frank told me began to crumble in my mind. Instead, another picture formed. They had used their guardianship when Grandma was frail to transfer her assets, then carefully hid the trail. I decided to call Grandma Evelyn. When I heard her voice, my chest tightened. She sounded weaker, breathing slower, but she recognized me instantly. "Vivian, it's been a while. How are you, dear?" I hesitated, then asked, "Grandma, about the lakeside land, is it true you were scammed?" On the other end, silence stretched. Then she spoke softly, "There are things I can't say over the phone. But remember this, don't believe everything they tell you." "Who are they?" I asked, but she quickly changed the subject, asking about my job and my health. The call ended, leaving me tangled in emotions, love, anger, and helplessness all at once. I wanted to go see her immediately, but it was peak season at the library and I couldn't take extended time off. A few months later, news that Grandma Evelyn had been hospitalized reached me through one of her old neighbors, not from my family. I rushed over, but when I arrived, Melinda blocked me right in the hallway. "She's tired and doesn't want visitors. You should go home." Through the crack in the door, I saw her lying on her side and 4 in her hand. Her eyes turned toward me, but Melinda quickly closed the door. That was the last time I saw her conscious. A few weeks later, she passed away. At the funeral, as I've said before, I waited outside the cemetery. The family declared she had left nothing but a few old belongings. No one mentioned the lakeside property and no one spoke about the money that had vanished. I wanted to find proof, but Melinda and Frank controlled all the documents. All I had were copies of the property records and a deep conviction that the truth had been buried. From that day on, I cut off all contact with them. Every time I received an invitation to a family gathering, I tore it up without reading further. For 10 years, I lived as if they didn't exist, and I knew they did the same with me. But the suspicion never left. It lay dormant in a dark corner of my mind, waiting for a chance to surface. And I never could have guessed that chance would come on the day when a call from the law office revealed that Grandma Evelyn had still left me something Frank and Melinda had never touched. In the years that followed, my life passed quietly, so steady that at times I feared the calm itself. I worked at the town's public library, a weathered old building with worn wooden doors and the smell of aged paper mixing with the coffee aroma from the cafe across the street. The job didn't pay much, but at least it was stable and gave me a reason to get out of bed each morning. My day began with unlocking the library doors, turning on the warm amber lights and shelving returned books where they belonged. I knew every creak of the shelves, every scratch on the reading tables. To most people, the library was a quiet place to borrow books or work. But to me, it felt like a buffer zone between the harsh outside world and the private life full of empty spaces I carried within. My old Corolla, over 10 years on the road, was another story. It broke down constantly, especially in the winter when snow piled high and road salt ate away at the paint. Some months, I had to choose between spending a few $100s to replace dangerously worn brakes or saving that money for Charlie's vet bills, my old dog who had been with me since the very beginning of living alone. Charlie had arthritis, moved slowly, but those warm brown eyes and the gentle wag of his tail every time I came home meant I could never neglect him. Every evening after work, I stopped by the vet to pick up Charlie's medicine before driving slowly back to my small third-floor apartment. Streetlights cast their dull yellow glow through the curtains, brushing over a few second-hand pieces of furniture I'd bought at flea markets. Dinner was usually a bowl of hot soup and a couple of slices of bread. Some nights, Charlie's heavy breathing was the only sound in the room, and I felt as if I lived in a shrunken world, barely big enough for two tired souls. The only person I was truly close to was Marlene, an older coworker at the library. Marlene was nearly 20 years my senior, her hair streaked with silver but her eyes sharp and warm, as if she could see right through every layer of pretense. She'd been divorced, raised 2 grown sons, and told me plainly from our very first conversation, if family starts draining your energy, learn how to close the door. No one gets to cross that threshold unless you let them. On my most exhausting days, Marlene would set a hot cup of black coffee in front of me, sit down and listen without interrupting. She didn't ask much about my family, only sighed occasionally. I've seen that kind before. People who know exactly how to use family ties as an excuse to take more from you than they ever give. Once my car died right there in the library parking lot. I was fumbling with the hood when Marlene walked up, wearing a thick sweater, and held out her car keys. Take it. I've got another old one at home. Use this for a few days, don't worry. I can't take that. I shook my head, but she pressed the keys into my hand. This is borrowing, not charity. Besides, you think I could stand there watching you trudge through the snow? Working at the library wasn't about shelving books or helping people find information. I knew the regulars. The widower who came every week for a detective novel, the freshman girl who always found a quiet corner to study, the middle-aged man who had lost his job and came daily to read the newspaper. In some way they were like me, coming to the library as a kind of shelter. Even so, that stability carried an undercurrent of fear. I knew I was living closed off, avoiding any impact that could hurt me. I avoided dating, skipped every party, and kept my distance from my relatives. Every time a family gathering invitation arrived, it went straight into the trash. I had locked the door completely as Marlene advised, but sometimes I wondered how tightly I'd locked my own heart. One winter afternoon, when the snow fell so heavily that the library was almost empty, Marlene and I sat at the counter sipping coffee. She looked at me, her voice lowering. Vivian, have you ever thought about leaving this town? Leaving? Where would I go? I shrugged. Anywhere. Just as long as it's not somewhere that holds so many painful memories for you. I gave a faint smile. I don't have the money and I wouldn't know where to start. Marlene didn't say anything else, but her eyes told me she knew I had built a wall to protect myself, and to imprison myself inside. In the days that followed, I became more aware that my life felt like a book left halfway through, sitting untouched on a shelf. No one turned the next page, not even me. I had a job, a home, a loyal four-legged friend, and a coworker who felt like family. Until a letter and an unexpected phone call put me in a position where standing still was no longer an option. I had no idea at the time that it would overturn everything I thought I knew about my family, and about myself. I wasn't sure what to expect when I got the call from the law office. At first, I thought it was probably just the final paperwork after Grandma Evelyn's death. A few forms to sign or personal items left behind. But the voice of Mr. Harris, deep and precise, told me there was something unusual. His office was on the 8th floor of an old building in the heart of the city. When I stepped inside, The scent of polished wood and decades-old paper created a solemn atmosphere that made me feel slightly out of place in my worn wool coat. Harris was in his 60s, his hair white but posture straight, his eyes serious. Rising, he shook my hand and motioned toward the chair across from his desk. "Thank you for coming so quickly, Vivian," he began. "There's something Mrs. Evelyn left for you, and according to her instructions, I must give it to you directly." He pulled a thick envelope from his desk drawer, sealed with red wax, the seal marked with 3 handwritten initials, EC. I took the envelope, feeling its weight in my hands. When I broke the wax and slid out the contents, the rustle of paper seemed louder than normal. On top was an old brass key, its keyring partially rusted, attached to a small slip of paper that read simply, "Cabin, Silverwood, Maine." Beneath it was a handwritten letter in Evelyn's familiar, if slightly shaky, script. "Vivian, if you're reading this, it means they've taken nearly everything from me. But this cabin is still in my name because they don't know it exists. Inside is what you need to take back what was lost. I believe one day you'll find the truth. But be careful. When money and secrets surface, people change quickly. With love, Grandma Evelyn." Each word pulsed through my chest. A cabin? I had never once heard her mention it. What you need to take back what was lost. What did that mean? Keepsake? Legal documents? Or something else entirely? I looked up and asked Mr. Harris, "Do you know exactly where this cabin is?" He handed me a map printed on yellowed paper. "This is the address and the directions. I've been authorized to transfer full ownership of the cabin, the key, and anything inside to you. According to records, it's never been mortgaged or sold, and the property taxes have been paid regularly for decades." "By who?" I asked immediately. "Mrs. Evelyn. Even in her final years, she mailed the payments. No one else in the family knows about this." I gripped the map tighter. My mind instantly pictured Frank and Melinda. If they found out, they'd stop at nothing to get it. On the way home, I couldn't stop thinking about the letter. Take back what was lost. Those words haunted me. I thought of the land transfer, the shaky signature, and her evasive eyes in our last conversation. This cabin held the proof. It could change everything. That night, I sat in the kitchen, the key lying on the table like a weight pulling my thoughts deeper. Charlie was curled up at my feet, looking up at me as if waiting for a decision. I called Marlene. "I'm taking a few days off," I said. "Where to?" she asked. "Maine. There's something Grandma Evelyn left for me." She was silent for a moment, then her voice grew more serious. "If it's family related, be careful. They don't change." "I know," I sighed. "But this time I think I need to face it." The next day I put in for 3 days leave. I packed the map, the key, a few changes of clothes, and food for Charlie into my old suitcase. Before locking my apartment door, I stood in the doorway for a moment, feeling as if I were about to step into a story whose ending I couldn't predict. The road to Silverwood was longer than I expected. Winter in New England turned everything white, the trees bare, the sky the color of lead. Here and there, a low wooden house appeared through the cold mist. Charlie sat quietly in the back seat, occasionally lifting his head when the car jolted over potholes. As I neared the point marked on the map, the road narrowed to a single lane. A weathered wooden sign reading Silverwood Lake leaned under the force of the wind. I turned onto a snow-covered trail, and after a few hundred more yards I saw it. A 2-story wooden cabin, steep roof, darkened by time. The front door was locked, but the brass key fit perfectly. When I turned it, the lock clicked and the door opened, releasing a rush of cold air laced with the smell of damp wood and old fireplace ash. Inside, everything looked frozen in time. The stone fireplace still held a few half-burned logs, a round wooden dining table lay under a thin layer of dust, and on the wall hung a black-and-white photograph of Grandma Evelyn in her youth, sharp eyes, a faint smile as if guarding a secret. I moved slowly from room to room, opening cabinets, but aside from a few old personal items, I found nothing resembling what you need to take back what was lost. Until I reached the upstairs bedroom. In the corner, beneath an old wool rug, a floorboard was loose. When I lifted it, there was a square metal box with a small lock. My hands trembled, not just from the cold but from a sharp sense of anticipation. In my coat pocket was a second brass key, smaller, more intricate. It fit the lock perfectly. The lock clicked open, and when I lifted the lid, inside was I sat down hard on the cold wooden floor, the metal box in front of me, my breath caught in my chest. Pale light from the window cast a dusty haze over everything. Inside was a bank passbook, still sealed by the bank. Balance: $280,000 in Evelyn's name. Beneath it was a thick stack of documents, the edges yellowed with age. I flipped through them, my pulse pounding when I saw the title: Land Transfer Agreement. The date was over 10 years ago, exactly when Frank had claimed he helped her sell the lakeside land to pay debts. But what made my skin crawl was Evelyn's signature. Stiff, shaky, and next to it, in the witness section, the neat, round handwriting of Melinda. I didn't need to be an expert to know this signature didn't match anything Evelyn had signed before. I dug deeper and found a small envelope of photographs. They were grainy shots taken inside Evelyn's house. A man, clearly Frank, leaning over the dining table, papers and a pen in front of him. His face tense while Evelyn leaned back, one hand blocking a sheet of paper. At the bottom of the box was a cassette tape wrapped in plastic. On its label, Evelyn had written in blue ink, Frank, April 12th. I found a small tape recorder in the bedside drawer. The batteries were old but still worked. When I pressed play, static crackled, then Evelyn's voice came through, weak but full of anger. You have no right to do this, Frank. That's my land. Frank's voice answered, urgent, lowered but clear. You don't understand, let me handle it. This money will grow and we'll all benefit. No. I never agreed to this. This is forgery. You'll thank me later. The papers are signed. The recording cut off suddenly, as if someone had snatched the device away. I turned it off, my hands shaking. Everything was here. The bank book, the forged contract, the photos and the taped conversation. Complete pieces of the story I'd long suspected. This wasn't just money. This was the theft of her final years. A naked betrayal by the person she had trusted most. The ring of my phone pulled me back to the present. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code matched the city where Frank and Melinda lived. I hesitated, then answered. Vivian? It's Cindy. Cindy was my eldest sister's daughter, someone I hadn't seen in nearly a decade. Her voice carried a forced warmth. I wanted to let you know Uncle Frank was admitted to the hospital. Mild stroke, but the doctor says he needs plenty of rest. The family thought, maybe you should join in on the discussion about Grandma's estate. Now that, well, things have changed. Changed? So when Frank was healthy they never thought of me, but now that he was in a hospital bed I was suddenly invited to the table? Why do you need me now? I asked, my voice even. Well, part of Grandma's house deed still has her name on it, and that part now belongs to her direct heir. So, I think it would be good if everyone sat down to find a common solution. Common solution. I almost laughed out loud. A common solution meant splitting things so they lost nothing and I let everything go. I'll think about it, I said, hanging up before she could coat her words in more sugar. That entire evening I sat at the kitchen table in the cabin, the evidence spread out before me. Outside, the wind whistled through the pines, snow tapping against the windows. Charlie lay at my feet, head resting on my knee as if sensing the tension in me. I knew I held something that, if made public, could destroy Frank and Melinda completely, not just disgrace them in the family but possibly bring legal consequences. But I also knew that without careful planning, I'd only turn myself into the center of a drawn-out battle. Before bed, I placed everything back into the cabin's small safe, locking it tight. I needed time to decide my next move. And if the family thought I'd rush to Frank's bedside to hear their negotiations, they were in for a surprise. The next morning I got another call, this time from Melinda herself. Her voice trembled slightly but kept its usual controlled tone. Vivian, your uncle's been through a lot. The doctor says he needs peace and we have some papers to sign. We're all family, so let's handle this together. I could hear the urgency beneath every word. In my mind, the image of the cassette tape and the forged signature flashed like sharp pins. I answered slowly, I'll come back. But this time we're going to speak frankly. I arrived at Frank's house on a gloomy afternoon, snow still falling lightly over the yard. The large house, with its wooden porch and glowing windows, looked almost peaceful, but I knew the air inside would be different. I had left Charlie at the cabin with a neighbor I'd asked to watch him. I wasn't bringing him into this hornet's nest. As I stepped inside, voices were already carrying from the living room. On the lace-covered coffee table sat stacks of papers, pens, and a steaming teapot. Melinda stood and walked over with a strained smile. "Vivian, you're here. It's been so long since the whole family's been together like this." Frank sat in an armchair looking far older than the last time I'd seen him. His face was pale, one side of his mouth still slightly slack from the stroke. Even so, his eyes held that same guarded glint. My cousin Kevin started the meeting. "We need to talk about the remainder of Grandma Evelyn's estate. It's not much, but it should be divided fairly. Vivian, since you didn't have much contact with her in her final years, your share might be smaller." Others nodded, and Melinda chimed in, her voice light but loaded with meaning. "We all know who was there for her in those last years, who took care of her, and who chose to walk away." I let them talk, nodding as if I agreed. Even when Melinda suggested I sign away my inheritance rights to avoid legal trouble, I pretended to hesitate and asked, "If I agree, everyone will help me with some expenses, right?" A brief silence, then Kevin said, "We could work out a reasonable amount." That's when I reached into my bag and set the small recorder gently on the table. "Before we talk numbers, I want you all to hear this." I pressed play. Static filled the air, then Evelyn's voice, so familiar, made the entire room fall silent. "You have no right to do this, Frank. That's my land." Frank's voice, unmistakable, "You'll thank me later. The papers are signed." The tape clicked off. Frank lurched forward but quickly sat back down, trembling, his lips quivering. I don't remember saying that. Must have been edited." Melinda's face flushed red as she stepped back toward her chair, her eyes avoiding everyone else's. Kevin and a few others exchanged stunned, even disbelieving looks. A voice spoke from the far end of the table. It was my cousin Patricia. This is why she sold the land?" "Frank, did you pressure her?" Frank's hand smacked weakly against the armrest. "No. I was only helping her. The money, the investment just didn't work out." Investment into a shell company where Melinda was a shareholder? The transfer signed on the same day she got out of the hospital, still needing a cane to walk? "I have the contract with the forged signature, and the photos." The room erupted in whispers. Melinda shot to her feet, her voice shrill. "Vivian, you're making this up. She loved us. She wanted to sell the land." I opened the folder, sliding the contract into the center of the table. This is her real signature from 3 years before, clear and steady. And this is the signature on the sale contract. Shaky, the pen strokes completely different. On the same day the witness was you. Care to explain? Melinda stammered something, but no real words came out. A few cousins began to shift their stance. Patricia folded her arms, staring straight at Melinda. I remember she was still very weak that day. Why would she sign something so major? Frank slammed his hand on the table again, this time to shut it down. "Enough. We're family. This should be left alone. Family doesn't take everything from each other and then say, 'Leave it alone.' Family doesn't forge signatures, lie, and turn someone into an outsider. You and Melinda did that to Grandma Evelyn, and everyone here deserves to know the truth." I saw confusion in some eyes, defensiveness in others, and in Frank's, a mix of anger and fear. I stood, gathering the folder and recorder into my bag. "You all can keep discussing how to divide that empty estate. I'll decide on my own share." Behind me, Kevin's voice came faint. "Ian, let's talk later." I didn't turn back. Cold wind hit my face, but my chest felt lighter. I'd let them hear the truth, and I knew from that moment, nothing in this family would ever be the same again. I stepped out of Frank's house, the heavy wooden door closing behind me like it was sealing off an entire chapter of my life. Snow fell softly, dusting my hair and coat. In my bag, the folder and cassette tape were a warm, heavy weight. Not evidence, but a reminder that I could end this completely with one phone call to a lawyer. But I didn't want to. I'd pictured the scene in court, the media coverage, the family's secrets dragged into the light, and realized that vision only made me tired. Having lost enough already, I knew a legal war would drain my energy, my time, and the years I wanted to live for myself. Back at the cabin, I lit a fire in the hearth. The glow danced on the wooden walls, warm yet a reminder of Maine's long winters. Charlie curled up on the rug, his steady breathing pulling me back into the present. I brewed a pot of tea, sat at the table, and laid the papers out one last time. Every contract page, every figure in the bank book, every photograph. They were etched into my memory now. I no longer needed to look at them to know the truth. I gathered them, sealed them in a moisture-proof bag and placed them into the cabin's locked compartment. That would be my safety system, not for leverage but as a reminder that I'd been strong enough to find the truth, and wise enough not to let it consume my life. The next day I called Marlene. Her voice over the phone was warm but tinged with curiosity. "So, you blew the place up, didn't you?" I let out a quiet laugh. "No explosions. Just enough noise so they know I'm not silent anymore. But I'm not suing." "You sure? They took a lot from your grandmother. I want to use my time and my money to build something for myself. I don't want to keep living around what they did wrong." I felt the quiet agreement in Marlene's pause. She understood, that lightness when you finally set down a burden you've carried too long. In the weeks that followed, I began making plans. I worked with a financial advisor, Mr. Harris recommended, to formalize ownership of Evelyn's bank account and appraise the cabin. The advisor looked at me in surprise when I said I wanted to sell it. "It's a great asset. Its value will only go up." "I know," I replied, "but I want to start somewhere else. This cabin holds a lot of memories, but not all of them are good. I need a space that's entirely new." When the sale was finalized, I paused on the porch, taking one last look at the snow-covered forest out back. This place had given me the truth, but I didn't need to live in its shadow forever. I found a small seaside house in a quieter town. White painted walls, windows facing the ocean, and a garden big enough for flowers and vegetables. On moving day, I opened every door to let the sea breeze sweep through, carrying away the scent of dust and old wood. Charlie ran circles around the yard like a child, and I stood in the doorway, feeling a freedom I hadn't felt in years. But I didn't want to live only for myself. With the remaining money, I set aside a portion to create a small fund called Evelyn's Key, providing legal aid to elderly people facing financial abuse or having their rights taken by their own families. Every case I reviewed made me think of her, and every time I helped someone regain justice, I felt like I was paying back a part of my debt to her. From time to time, I still got messages or emails from a few relatives. At first, roundabout questions, then shifting into blame that I'd disrupted family harmony by digging up the past. I read them, smiled, then deleted. No anger, no sadness. Just distant echoes. One morning, while watering plants in the yard, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was an old photo. Evelyn and me when I was about 6, standing by the lake, her hand on my shoulder. On the back, in handwriting I knew well, were 4 words: "Proud of you." I didn't know who sent it, but I framed it and set it on my desk, so that every time I looked at it, I'd remember that choosing to let go instead of seeking revenge was also a way of protecting her legacy. In those early days by the sea, I was still adjusting to the slower pace here. Mornings brought gentle sunlight through the curtains, the sound of waves like the steady heartbeat of a healthy body. I spent the first few weeks tending the back garden, my imagined sanctuary after years of exhaustion. Marlene visited at the end of that first weekend. She brought a basket of baked goods and a stack of papers. When I asked about them, she smiled lightly. "You said you wanted to start a fund for women stripped of their rights by their families. So, let's get started." We sat at the dining table, the window slightly open to let the sea breeze drift in, spreading all the papers out in front of us. I took out my notebook and began sketching a plan. Criteria for receiving aid, the initial funding from the sale of the cabin and part of Grandma Evelyn's savings account, how to verify applications. Marlene added her experience from years of serving on community boards and working with local charities. The fund's name was decided that very afternoon: Evelyn's Key. I wanted the name to remind me and everyone else of the key she had left behind. One that opened not a physical door but also the door to truth and the right to live freely. In the following months, we spent a lot of time contacting law offices, women's organizations, and legal aid centers in neighboring states. At first it was quiet, but then the first stories began to arrive. A middle-aged woman whose brother forged their parents' will to take the family farm. A young woman forced by her family to sign away her inheritance in exchange for peace. I'll never forget the first case we successfully supported. It was Mrs. Linda, 62 years old, whose son-in-law and daughter secretly sold the home she had lived in for more than 30 years to pay off their business debts. When I met her, I could see the disappointment more than anger. disappointment that her own blood could turn on her like that. With support from the fund, Mrs. Linda hired a skilled lawyer, took the case to court, and regained ownership of her house. The day she called to tell me she'd won, her voice shook. I didn't get my house back. I got back my faith in myself. Those words stayed with me for a long time. As the number of cases grew, I knew we couldn't remain just a fund. We needed a non-profit organization so we could accept donations, hire legal staff, and expand our network. Marlene agreed immediately, and from there, we officially launched the Evelyn's Key Foundation. I took charge of operations and fundraising, while Marlene became our strategic advisor. We brought in a few volunteer attorneys, a trauma counselor, and a young accountant, Anna, who was deeply passionate about the work because her own mother had once faced a similar situation. Our first office was on the second floor of a red brick building near the harbor. Outside hung a small sign. Inside was a warm space with bookshelves, desks, and a cozy corner for visitors to share their stories without fear of judgment. Every morning on my way to work, I walked along the coast road, hearing the seagulls and smelling the salt in the air. Some days I thought about the me from a few years ago, the woman sitting alone in a cramped city apartment, avoiding all family contact. If someone had told me then that one day I'd be running an organization helping dozens of women reclaim their legal rights, I probably would have laughed. But now I could see clearly that every step, no matter how painful, had led me here. We began hosting free community workshops, teaching women how to protect their property rights, recognize signs of financial abuse, and seek legal help. Many came to listen but later returned with their own stories. Each success brought us more trust from the community. One autumn afternoon, as we were preparing for a talk at the town library, Marlene looked at me and said, "You know, every time we help someone stand up, I'm sure Evelyn's smiling somewhere." I didn't reply, but my heart warmed. The image of Grandma in her old sweater holding the cabin keyring came back to me clearly. The peace of the seaside town, the laughter in the office, the heartfelt thank you from people who once felt hopeless. These had all become part of my new life. And I realized I wasn't healing. I was building something more enduring than revenge. A living legacy. That afternoon, the sea breeze blew gently, the salty air filling every breath. I set my teacup down on the wooden table, my gaze still fixed on the distant whitecaps chasing each other to shore. Melinda's letter rested quietly in the drawer, no longer stirring anger or unease in me. It was a piece of paper, a few sentences from someone who once believed she had the right to decide everything in my life. Marlene stepped onto the porch, holding a new stack of case files from the fund. She set them down and said softly, "This week there are 3 urgent cases. A young woman whose brother stole her entire inheritance, an elderly woman forced out of her own home by her children, and a middle-aged woman whose story sounds a lot like yours." I opened the folder and read each line. The names, the situations, the tear stains on the paper. All painfully familiar. I realized that what I had gone through wasn't rare. It was part of quiet, recurring cycles in many families. "We'll help them," I said without hesitation. Marlene smiled, her eyes glowing with empathy. She had been the one to hold my hand when everything fell apart, and now, together, we were holding out our hands to others. As the sun began to set, golden light stretching across the sea, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Vivian, I'm the daughter of the elderly woman from the other day. My mom has gotten her house back." "Thank you," she said. "Some people aren't related by blood, but they're the real family." I read the message over and over, warmth spreading through my chest. That evening I walked to the beach. Children were chasing each other, laughter carrying across the sand. An elderly couple sat on a bench, hands entwined, eyes on the horizon. I stopped, sat on a rock, and listened to the waves. I used to think justice only came when you got back every dollar, every inch of land. But now I understood. Sometimes justice comes in another form. The freedom to live without being held down by those who only know how to take. A few days later, I received a small package from a woman the fund had once helped. Inside was a sea blue knitted scarf and a note. "Thank you for showing me that letting go doesn't mean losing." I held the scarf to my cheek, feeling its warmth even with the wind still cold outside. I knew the waves out there would never stop breaking on the shore, as stories of injustice would never completely disappear. But every time we helped someone stand again, I felt as if we were adding one more solid stone to the seawall protecting them. Maybe everyone who hears this story will see it differently. Some will say I should respond to Melinda's letter, give her a chance to say what she's never said. Others will think as I do that silence is sometimes the clearest answer. I believe that in every family what keeps us together isn't the promises we make, but how we treat each other when we're under no obligation to do so. What about you? If it were you, would you open that door one more time? Or leave it closed forever? Share your thoughts. And if you want to hear more real-life, deeply emotional stories about family, connection, and the choices that change our lives, subscribe to the channel for the next chapter.